Military Redditors, when you were in boot camp, what was the funniest thing you ever heard one of your drill sergeants say? The DIs did this thing where they would yell freeze, recruit, freeze. We would have to stop whatever we were doing. As my bunkmate was running back from the showers wearing nothing but a towel, the DI screamed freeze, recruit, freeze. My bunkmate tried to freeze on one leg and then fell down, naked, and because he was following orders, just laid there naked. I laughed and my DI called me a cock gazer. We were marching back from our mock PT test and the tornado sirens began to go off. Navy boot camp is in Illinois, and we looked to our right and there's a tornado forming a couple football fields away in the middle of base. Our RDC, who was already irritated by our failure to line up in time, starts yelling run, duckers, run, and 2 whole divisions of about 180 people break formation and begin to run to our barracks for our lives. At the time it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. But in hindsight it was actually pretty funny because the RDC caught a lot of it from other RDCs for doing that. He would explain to us, what the duck was I supposed to do? Keep you at heads in rank? Am I supposed to tell you? Oh no, stay in formation. Keep marching. Duck no. I'm not trying to die in this shithole. I am going to take it in a box and send it to your parents for sending me theirs. A guy had his own nickname tattooed on his forearm. The DI said, is that so your boyfriend knows who's jivin' the react around? My battle buddy and I were ordered to dig holes. So when we're about to the waist he proceeded to turn on a hose. He started to fill the holes with water and told us to stay in the hole. Another DS walks by and asks him what he's doing. He says, I'm watering my petunias. Y'all a bunch of Mufasa looking Methodicas. We had a lot of guys that grew facial hair very quickly. Walking by the snake pit when I'm stopped by another MTI who asked if my TI cursed at us. I answered no, as they technically aren't supposed to, but they still do. The MTI then grabbed a banana off my plate and said if I wanted it back I had to answer truthfully. Food being a luxury and I do love my bananas. I answered yes and he sent me on my way. Later that day in the day room my MTI comes busting in. Which one of you Methodicas sold me out for a goddamn banana? If you had to take a rid, my MTI would ask if you're pushing cotton to asses how badly you had to go. Basic is at first terrifying, but as you go through and start to relax you hear some of the funniest things in basic. Edit. Thank you for popping my gold cherry. I just want to stand here and stare at my privates. When I was in basic, the 3 drill sergeants for my platoon were all black, and we had a few racial incidents. The biggest offender was a hitbag, overweight, underachieving guy. We'll call him Pierce. Upon receiving punishment for one of his many duck-ups, Pierce let loose some racial slurs, and that was the last line. While Pierce and his unlucky battle buddy were getting the dog it smoked out of them in front of the whole platoon, the drill sergeants were spitballing some ideas to resolve his behavior. Their solution was glorious. At the time in Army Basic, probably still today, every soldier had an assigned battle buddy, someone to share accountability and responsibility with. My company took this very seriously. We happened to have 2 very driven, very athletic, very tall and large black soldiers in the platoon as well. The platoon also happened to have an odd number of soldiers. There was a change in buddy assignments, and from that day until graduation, everywhere Pierce went, he was to be in Oreo formation, with each of upstanding black soldiers on either side of him, sharing accountability for his actions. They were colloquially referred to as the Oreo by even the leadership after a while. By graduation, Pierce had mostly turned around and was made into a person more worthy of wearing the uniform. TLDR, racism punished with an Oreo. Smells like Vaseline and broken dreams. Boys, if you don't stop swinging your arms, I'll ducking rip them off and beat you with them. My personal favorite. Unduck yourself. I am not your mama. I could be your daddy, cause I'm betting your mama's a hose, and I like me some hoes. This was my husband's story from Family Day, 1/2-way between basic and 8 for scouts. Back while we were dating, Family Day was a weekend pass. The only break to see families that a scout got during the 4 months of combined basic and 8 training. I came in to see him by myself. Most of the other trainees had either just their parents or parents plus the girlfriend. Here's his story from after I left and he went back to the barracks. Husband. Standing in formation. DS Morgan asked who got some over family day. A bunch of hands went up. Not mine though. And he yelled back. Bullet. He said something about not a single one of you got any. And then pointed at me. He's the only one who got any. Look at that stupid grin on his face. The rest of you should be lining up to suck his D so you can remember what pussy tastes like. A recruit interrupted the chief to say, Chief, there's a bunny rabbit behind you. Chief looked like his brain had actually shorted out. Then responded, is it armed? Edit. There was a rabbit behind the chief. Chief went off on how the recruit must be from New York City because he'd never seen a rabbit before. Then he sarcastically complimented the recruit on his eagle-eyed awareness of the Al-Qaeda killer attack rabbit. If I wanted to hear it, I would have farted. During roll call, there was a soldier whose last name was Parts, so DS would read out loud, Private Parts. Private Parts. There is Private Parts. Whenever a number of soldiers got sick, one of the DS would say, it's cause y'all keep kissing each other. Cut that ducking it out. DS Salcalis. How do you spell my name? Private. DICK Drill Sergeant. Does it look like I have a sweep hanging between my legs? In response to a basic trainee referring to her as a sir. My RDC, Navy boot camp instructor, ripped ass all the time. It got to the point where she would always do it at the most quiet time just to beat us later for laughing. My favorite moment was when we were lining up for chow and she walks by and toots so hard the entire line heard it. 80 plus people, and as she hears people giggling, she whips around and screams, WHO the duck said that? All the grins were wiped immediately only to hear her follow up. Some assholes talking it behind my back. Edit. Another time a guy ripped ass during a mock inspection so the same RDC told him to bend over and recruit vacuum that methodica, taking in deep breaths. Retelling the MR. Fluffy story at U bunk by's request. One of the first days in basic a guy in my platoon was standing at attention while having his room inspected by the instructor. It didn't matter how nice his room was because there was a large piece of fuzz fluff on his shirt that immediately drew the sergeant's attention. Imagine a female, French Canadian, sergeant with this accent. Recruit Bloggins. What is that on your shirt? Is that a fluffy? Yes, sergeant. Why is there a fluffy on your shirt, Bloggins? I must have missed it, sergeant. Missed it? It is so huge. How did you miss such a big fluffy? She picks it off of him. Hold out your hand. He holds out his hand and she places it in his palm. This is MR. Fluffy. Find a home for him. Like a pill bottle or something. From now on, whenever I want to see MR Fluffy you must bring him to me. And so, for the rest of basic, every time the sergeant found a piece of fuzz she would yell out, MR Fluffy, and Bloggins would have to march over to her and present MR Fluffy and she would formally hand him the new piece of fuzz to add to MR Fluffy. There was hell to pay if he didn't have MR Fluffy with him at all times. I posted this about a year ago. Hope it still holds up. Yes. The Pinecone incident. So, I was at basic in Fort Benning. And we were zeroing our weapons as a company. Zeroing a weapon is when you ensure it shoots where you want it to by shooting a paper target repeatedly. Sounds easy enough. Now, I'm a terrible shot. I know this. Everyone knows this. However, I get even worse when I'm being screamed at. I spent hours on the line until, finally, there were only 4 of us cats who hadn't gotten a go in the whole company. We had 3 more hours of range time. And if we failed to zero, we'd be recycled. Recycled entails having to revert to another company earlier along in basic training. So, not only do you lose your buddies, but you catch a couple extra weeks of training with a unit that knows you're a ritbull of some sort. So, a fate worse than death. After another unsuccessful grouping, my drill sergeant, without a word, picked me up from the prone position and stood me up. He looked at me and said, go find me a pine cone. Confused, I took 4 steps, scooped up a pine cone and took it back to him. I presented him my findings, and he responded, private, that's not my pine cone. Go find me my ducking pine cone. Keep in mind, this is a forest in Georgia. There's a metric ton of pine cones. So I jog off and work on my mission. This entire time, my DS is shooting all my rounds off, genuinely enjoying himself. Every pine cone I bring to him is not his pine cone. This continued for about 15 minutes while the rest of the company, sitting in a clearing eating MREs, cheered me on. Finally, I breathlessly run up and hand him another pine cone. About to jog off to grab another, he looks at me, then the pine cone, then me, Steve. He yells, "You found Steve. Private. I hit you not." I had never been more relieved in my entire life, until his face scrunched into a grimace. "Wait, Private, where's his family?" WHO the duck takes a pine cone away from his family? So, terrified, I spend around half an hour scavenging for appropriate sized pine cones, while he fires maniacally. Eventually, I hunt down his wife and his 2 kids. At one point I brought Steve's estranged son, Dennis, and I needed to do push-ups for causing Steve emotional duress. Anyway, he lets me fire. After I prop up the family to cheer me on, I go prone, and I zero on the first iteration. He picks me up again, cracks the only smile I ever saw from him, and says, "It was all in your head, you dumb duck. Good job. Now go do push-ups till I'm tired." He also had me write my congressman later that day to apologize for wasting taxpayer money on bullets. Fort Benning. Never again. TL. Dr. A Pinecone saved my military career, and Duck Dennis. Assume the position. We were about to do punishment push-ups. I forget why, but we were his first female company, and 80 women shouted "Yes sir," very enthusiastically, and threw ourselves onto the deck, while smiling. He was fair-skinned and blonde. Poor man turned a lovely shade of vermilion and ran and locked himself in his office. No push-ups were done because our female CC was laughing too hard and she had to leave the room as well. From then on, she was the one who ordered us to do push-ups. Edit, my goodness. Some of you are so pervy. I'm shocked. Shocked, I say, to learn that there is sexually suggestive conversation being bandied about on the internet. P. We were lined up in 4 rows, or elements. One day a lone soul lined up in his own element. The instructor came running around the corner staring at this guy. He got right up to his face and screamed, "Are you Bruce Willis?" "No, sir," he whimpered. "Then why are you in the 5th element?" I had to use everything within me to not laugh. Marines. DI talking to Asian recruit. I ever tell you about my grandfather? Recruit. He fought in Vietnam. I don't know who I hate more, you or my grandfather for not killing your grandfather. Your mother should have dug you out with a coat hanger. Your mother should have swallowed you. You all would duck up a 4-piece puzzle. Holy it. That's a 2-piece puzzle and you ducked it up. To the idiot who wouldn't shut up. X. You are now a Muslim woman. You will not speak until spoken to. If you drop your magazine again before putting your weapon on safe, I will kick you in the balls and make you sing like Mariah Carey. To a short female wearing BC glasses. You look like a minion. You know that, right? After we all had our buzz cuts, I'd sure like to drag my balls across your head. Not necessarily funny, but my DL put the whole no such thing as a stupid question thing perfectly. He told us there's no such thing as a stupid question, but some questions come with push-ups. He's so dumb. If he fell in a barrel of tits, he'd come out sucking his thumb. I'll never forget that line. I will murder you in front of a live studio audience. People fall down the stairs all of the time here. We don't look into it much. I would take you into combat, but I'm afraid you would shoot me in the ass. This was in USMC officer candidate school in Quantico, VA back in the 1980s. We were all Marine Option Naval ROTC Scholarship midshipmen. We were shining our boots when a staff sergeant, called a sergeant instructor, from another platoon walked through. Delbert, a friend of mine, glanced up from his work and made a microsecond of eye contact with the sergeant instructor. SI, midshipman. Why are you looking at me? Delbert, silence. SI, midshipman. Do you like me? At this point I am listening and thinking it. I'm not sure there is a good answer to that question. Delbert, yes. Sergeant instructor. SI, Well, liking leads to loving and loving leads to ducking. Do you want to duck me, midshipman? Delbert? No, Sergeant Instructor. SI. Then keep your damned eyeballs off of me. Girl had bad form, but too high, when we were all in the front leaning rest position doing push-ups. Drill, what are you doing, Private? You're supposed to be doing push-ups, not trying to get ducked. It was actually said by a female drill SGT, who I'm pretty sure was removed shortly after. I had a dream last night, Private S. Do you want to know what it was about? Not really, Drill Sergeant. I had a dream you were eating pudding, and I woke up with a spoon in my ass. What do you think about that, Private S? I proceeded to die from laughter. It was the middle of the night and we were awake and sneakily writing letters to our loved ones. Then, out of nowhere, our sergeant, our brother flight sergeant, and a random, older, Mexican man burst in the room and literally flipped the first bed, which has someone in it. I just remember hearing a loud boom and turning to see my buddy flying through the air in slow motion. The sergeants trashed everything, as you can imagine, while this Mexican guy stood in the corner the whole time. After destroying our rooms and lockers, they demanded it all be fixed and cleaned by the time they returned in the morning, and the three of them left. As we cleaned, we all talked and questioned each other on who the Mexican guy was. Well, on our last day in basic, we asked our sergeant who he was. He immediately starts laughing and says that they were at the bar and started talking to this random guy. The three of them did a bunch of shots together and got really drunk and started talking about how the two of them were TIs. DIs. The guy mentioned how cool and funny it must be. They looked at each other. Then they looked at him and said, "Wanna see?" So the three of them hopped in a cab, smashed in the room in the middle of the night, and wrecked everything worse than I think I saw the whole time I was in basic. All because they got drunk with a Mexican and thought it'd be funny. We were in trouble. Multiple instructors in our male dorm. Our instructor, a female, was talking to me about how we ducked up. I'm locked at attention. Yes, marming for my life. Two instructors leave our dorm, male and female. Our door guard yells, "Lady leaving the dorm." That's the right thing to say when all females have exited the dorm. Our instructor stops mid-sentence and yells over my shoulder at the door guard, "I guess I'm wearing my D today." My basic was co-ed with females on the ends of the barracks and males in the middle. One night a female was caught blowing a male in the men's room. He was chaptered out due to past behavioral problems. The next day my female drill sergeant calls all the females into a meeting, presumably to let them know what is and is not acceptable behavior. She strolls in a couple minutes later than scheduled, picking at her teeth, and said, "Excuse me, I've been eating nuts. I ought to rename you Minnie Mouse because you are ducking Goofy." Not necessarily a line, but the funniest moment of basic, to me. We're around halfway through at the time, and we're getting smoked in our platoon bay, smallish room. Barely enough space for everyone in the front leaning rest doing push-ups. Concrete walls and windows. It's winter time at FLW. I can't even remember why we're being punished, but we've been forced to do exercise after exercise. And at the time we were doing push-ups, it's late at night. I think it was during what should have been our 30 minutes of free time to shower and get ready for lights out. Our DS was going off. "Privates, I want to see the ceiling sweat in here. The windows are starting to sweat. The walls will be next. And I want the ceiling to start sweating so I can PT you while IT rains. I will drown you in your own sweat." As she takes a breath in to continue yelling, one kid from the back of the room goes, "From the window at ours to the walls." She ducking died laughing on the spot. Only time any of our DS cracked like that the entire cycle. The combination of tiredness and laughing meant like half the platoon crashed into the floor. She walked out of the room laughing, came back and just said, "Go to bed, privates." Good times. Oh boy, have I got a story for you. So I was in the AF basic training. We had this kid, whose name I cannot remember now. Probably because our TI training instructor had a special name for him. "Hey Marty McFly, get over here." We all sort of chuckle or fight them off. This goes on for weeks and weeks. Well, one day this kid is sort of having a bad day and he keeps ducking things up. The TI loses his mind and says, God damn it, Marty McFly, get over here and blah blah blah. The kid snaps. Why do you keep calling me Marty McFly? TI responds. Because your glasses are so thick you can see into the future. We all laughed our asses off and had to do push-ups. I left Mets with a guy from my hometown that I had went to high school with, and we got assigned to the same flight. He heard me call him by his first name and gave this whole speech about how if you're so comfortable with each other, why don't you hold each other's hands? We stood there and stared at him blankly for a minute. Then he seriously made us hold hands for the rest of the ducking day. So one time in basic we had this fat kid and boy did he love candy. So he went to the nearby store and bought it a bag of Skittles. Of course. Locker searches for contraband come around and he's sweating like a damn pig. Somehow, the drill sergeants miss the bag and he looks better. Then as another recruit moves out of the way for his drill sergeant, he trips and knocks over the fat guy's locker. Skittles everywhere. It was a pretty big bag too. You know what they did to him? They had him dig small holes for every Skittle and each morning he had to go outside early to water them in order to grow a rainbow. Edit. Apparently my friend stole this from Reddit when he told me about it. I thought it was an original story. Don't give me karma unless you want to. Went through RAF basic training when I was 16. This was back in 1988 when things were a bit more robust. Among the classics from my drill SGT were Duck You're Ugly. I'll bet when you were a kid your parents had to tie a stake round your neck to get the dog to play with you. Did you iron that shirt, Eamon? Yes, SGT. Well, turn the ducker on next time. Looks like you ironed that with a ducking brick. We are all allowed to be red now and then, but you Eamon are abusing the privilege. We can be here all night, gents. I have no urge to get home. I have a salad for tea and my wife is hideous. Now move. This was the same guy who, after I passed out with no failures and no backflights as the youngest of 42 recruits, just looked me up and down and said, not bad. Keep cracking on and not ducking up and you'll go far, son. Now duck off. A legend. This will get buried. But for various reasons I was temporarily allowed to take my time eating and separated from the rest of the flight. I heard a T take somebody from the pack and near me, behind me. I could hear but not see. In a calm collected voice he said, son, you're the reason I go home and beat my wife and kids. I was at the end of my rope and had to bite my tongue to not laugh out loud in the sudden unnecessarily escalation. You never see drill instructors eat, or sleep, for that matter. They were godlike humans who had supreme authority over us. Anyways, at the end of USMC boot camp, you have the Crucible, a series of team building exercises, hikes and good old fashioned bonding. After it's over and you are officially a Marine, you have the warrior breakfast. I sat down with my plate of food and gorged. I then look up to see the craziest drill instructor in my platoon. With his wild-eyed death stare sit down in a hurry, look at his food, look at me and say, first ducking meal in the 3 months. Edit. On a daily basis, drill instructors said some of the funniest shit I will never hear again. Boot camp was the most fun I never want to have again. That's the best way I could explain it to a civilian. My dad joined the Navy and went to boot camp. He was the yeoman, guy in charge of administrative duties. His company commander was black and nicknamed him Yo-Yo. Anyways, they have a camp-wide athletics event where all the companies compete for a fancy streamer to put on top of the company flag. My dad signed up for the 100-meter sprint and the CC came over and said, Yo-Yo, what are ya doing? We got plenty of black kids in here for the sprint. My dad replies, yes sir, but I'll have you know I finished 6th in 200-meter high hurdles in California. CC says, I don't give a Yo-Yo. We got all the black kids we need. My dad finally says, okay sir, but if you let me do it you won't be disappointed. And his CC lets him do it. At the race my dad lined up and every other contestant was black. But it didn't really matter, and as my dad blew past the finish line in first, his CC runs up to him and yells, woo goddamn it Yo-Yo, you are the fastest white kid I ever seen. We were all on the line on Paris Island and we had to take out our ink sticks, pens. One recruit in the entire platoon didn't move. When the drill instructor asked why he didn't move, the recruit said his ink stick was in his foot locker. The drill instructor made the recruit walk over to his foot locker, bring it back to the line, and shake that itch until an ink stick falls out. The foot locker was closed and he was just standing there shaking it for about 8 minutes or so while the DI just kept yelling, "Faster, I want a damn ink stick." The recruit directly across the line from the kid shaking the foot locker takes out an extra ink stick, waits for the DI to turn his head, and slid that thing across the deck, between the drill instructor's legs, and by the grace of God, it landed perfectly under the foot locker. The DI didn't notice. The next 15 seconds went along the lines of, "Faster, faster damn it, faster, far well he'll be damned." As soon as he saw the ink stick, he walked away. When our instructor called our formation 20-piece chicken McNabardis, hard to not bust up while at attention. I had a guy say okay to my RDC, so she had him stuff his head inside a locker in the front of the compartment and had him yell okay. She walked all the way to the back and would yell at him, "I can't hear you." 2 minutes later another guy did the same thing. So she put his head in a locker across from the first guy and they said okay and okay back for a good 5 minutes.